Okay, good afternoon and welcome back from what I hope was a restful President's Day weekend. This is going to be lecture 11 of the course Legal Studies 160, Punishment, Culture, and Society. Today's topic, America's near abolition and the revival of the American death penalty. Before I get to today's and this week's topic, let me just remind you that we're nearing the midterm, March 1st, which will be a week from this Thursday. Will be an in-class midterm. You'll be taking it right where you're sitting now, unfortunately. The good news is you won't need books or computers with you. You'll be writing on, I'll let you know whether to bring a blue book, Scantron sheet, or some combination thereof, certainly before Tuesday of next week. And you won't be, at the end of the exam, you'll be able to go home or go on with your afternoon. There'll be no class that day other than the midterm. What will the midterm cover? Essentially everything that we've covered up to that point. It technically including the last segment of this death penalty period of our study, which will be a brief comparative look at the Asian patterns, recent patterns, I should say, in terms of death penalty abolition and retention. Don't worry too much about that. I'm not going to cram a comparable history of the development of the death penalty in China, South Korea, Taiwan, India, Japan, etc., comparable to what I've developed for you in terms of Europe and especially England and the United States. I couldn't do it justice, and indeed part of the point I'm going to make to you is that we can learn a lot by taking Asia more seriously than historically we have, that is we who study punishment. Nonetheless, it won't introduce a huge amount of new material for you. In fact, I think we'll use it to review many of the points that we've already made about capital punishment by looking at it comparatively. But you will be responsible for the material that we do cover that day. You'll also be responsible for the materials that began the course, introductory materials. The good news is that, not that you should sort of delete all this information once you've taken the midterm exam, but the final exam will not be cumulative. It'll only cover the second part of the course. Obviously, you'll be drawing on the first part of the course in your, hopefully in your papers and in future endeavors. But in terms of your preparation for the final, you'll be able to move on to the second part of the course. So any questions about either the format or content of midterm? Yeah. No, there's now a section up of spring 2012 slides. You're certainly welcome to look at the early ones. Like I say, they're raw material, and they shouldn't be relied on in terms of what's going to be covered on the midterm. You are responsible for. I do tend to impart a lot of information in class. That's not necessarily a replication or duplication of what's in the readings, which always seems to be a bit of a waste of time. Like you could read it at home, so why come hear it from me? So I try to add value to the lectures, and so you will want to consult the slides, I think. But yes, and I'll try to get this next couple up as soon as possible. This week we're kind of taking on the American side of the post-World War II abolition retention pattern, and I'm going to kind of consider today's lecture and tomorrow's lecture, I should say Thursday's lecture, to be a little bit of a continuation of the same discussion. So I'm hoping to get, say, to the end of McCluskey by today. We may end up talking about it more on Thursday, etc. Did you have a question? Just the notes you have and the readings. I mean, the only what you're responsible for are only the required readings, never the recommended ones, which are there to point you in the direction of further readings if you want to do some research for your paper, for instance, on that topic, and the content of the lectures. Yes. So just to clarify, all the lectures up to the lecture before. That's right. That's right. But I wanted to reassure you that I'm not going to try to introduce a vast amount of new material on the Tuesday before the midterm, and I think you'll find it in some ways a helpful review. Yeah. You kind of mentioned the types of questions. We've also seen just one sort of example question, not sure just an idea. Well, let me just give you an example off the top of my head, for instance. But just give you, I think the format you'll see, we have not composed fully the midterm yet, so I'm not revealing any state secrets. And the relative, whether we decide to go all multiple choice, all short answer, some combination remains to be seen. Multiple choice you're familiar with, you'll typically get a description of something, perhaps an execution ritual or something of that nature. And then you might get a series of questions about that. You might get, for instance, quoting from a description of a London execution of the sort that we talked about in class, you might get a question like, which of the following elements of the execution story you just read would Durkheim most think of as salient or important to understanding, or a comparable question for Foucault or Marxist. That'd be one style, or one kind of way of framing content questions. If we do it as a short answer or an identification question, you might be required to write typically a sentence or at the most two, sort of providing a definition or an explanation. And then all will be revealed a week from Thursday, and then you'll have the same basic format for your final exam. Other notes in the news. Interesting events at San Quentin over the weekend, where some segment of the Occupy Oakland movement has regrouped as something of a prisoners' rights and prison conditions movement. And I think there's an interesting topic there for a paper in terms of sort of the new salience of punishment as a political issue in terms of social movements and activism. So some of you may want to pay attention to that one. Okay. So I'd like to do today is sort of start at the end, in a sense, where I'm going to be kind of on Thursday, thinking about how distinctive America looks today when we think about the global pattern of abolitionist and retentionist countries, right? So if we look at the major industrial powers, and we group them according to whether they're abolitionist or whether they retain the death penalty, so-called retentionist countries, and I'm ranking them loosely because I'm not an expert in this in terms of their relative size as an industrial economy. I think that's roughly accurate, but I could be off by one or two. In any event, I put the question mark next to the United States because I think the question that is framed when we think about capital punishment in the United States in comparative mode today is why the U.S. seems to be sort of in the wrong column. We might, given our history and large tradition of sort of identifying with the European historical tradition, in particular England, expect to see the United States in the abolitionist camp. Of course, it is not. It retains the death penalty. And that is the focus of a great deal of theoretical and empirical controversy among students of punishment, culture, and society. Why is that? Why is America, which we might expect to be very similar to the UK, to the United Kingdom, and generally to the European pattern, or perhaps broadly to a sort of a Christian European pattern that would include countries like Brazil that come out of the European colonial and imperial experience, although, as with many countries who have adopted abolitionism, Brazil adopted abolitionism in 1889 at a time of political liberation from colonialism when they established themselves as a republic. But in any event, America, stubbornly, it would seem, stands in this retentionist camp. And as you can imagine, a good deal of the analytic game among students of punishment and society today is to sort of look at some of these great theoretical traditions, or perhaps find a way to bring them together to think about why. Why is America so peculiar? What's so exceptional about America, especially when we put it against its typical partners, the countries that it fought World War I and World War II with, although of course Japan and I should say China was our ally in World War II. Why does it seem so exceptional? And I think least people in my line of work, have no great deal of trouble using Durkheim or using various accounts, Marxist accounts of hegemony and class control and ideology, or using Foucault's accounts of sort of the role of punishment as a political technology, to think about some of the things that may make America exceptional from Europe, maybe in some ways more like these all Asian countries that I've listed as the major industrial retentionist countries, or perhaps in a class by itself, but which happens to share with these Asian industrial powers retention of the death penalty, but perhaps for different reasons. So just as sort of a review ahead of our midterm, would some people like to, let's try out some Durkheimian, Marxist, and sort of Foucauldian moves on this American exceptionalism just for a little bit, and then, because it's kind of the end of the story, I want to come back to how we got to be in such an exceptional place. Let's maybe just work through them systematically. What might Durkheim say? Or what kind of factors would one thing I always want to emphasize for you is that these theoretical frameworks are more helpful as question raisers than they are answer providers, right? So what kind of questions might Durkheim point us to in thinking about how America ends up as an exceptional country in this pattern? I know everybody knows Durkheim by now, so don't be shy. Start calling on people in the back row. That would be extremely rude. What kind of factors does Durkheim look at? Please.
One thing might, the United States being at least isolated, geographically, where the European countries are more all together. I mean, you talk a lot about solidarity and like social solidarity among societies, so you might point that as being a reason why the United States kind of just has for whatever reason.
Well, now, it's certainly true that for Durkheim, punishments are, among other things, but importantly, a reflection of the kind of social solidarity that we have with other members of our society, and in a sense, the content of our punishment, sort of what we punish and how we punish, reflects in some ways the content of that solidarity, or what we might call he called the common consciousness or collective consciousness that exists. Now, he didn't say much about geographic isolation. I suppose one point could be that America's sense of solidarity, if you will, has historically been strengthened by the sense of being isolated. You might say, we might predict that compared to European countries, which at least at various times in recent history have seemed very enthusiastic about a shared identity as Europeans, the EU and the Euro being obviously the major developments of that America sort of takes pride in its exceptionalism and has a sense of itself as a very distinctive country. And to that extent, and indeed, we might think that once we've established ourselves as having the death penalty when Europe doesn't, that could actually work for our retention of the death penalty. It's sort of saying that the French have done something is usually not a very popular way to get the idea that America should do it, at least if you take our mainstream political discourse as typical. Yes? I think that's a very helpful move, because we know from Durkheim that one of the things that punishment is supposed to do is bring us together. And we might ask, what about America would make it somehow in need of the death penalty to bring it together more than Europe? The notion that we're a newer country is one that we sort of like, right? We're a young country, although 200 years doesn't sound that young to me at the moment, but certainly young compared to France. Not young, by the way, compared to Germany, which was only created as a unified country in the latter part of the 19th century. But the other point that has been made, though, that's not inconsistent with your point and has something to do with also the sense of isolation, is that most of the people, I guess all of the people who have formed part of the United States, or the people of the United States, have come from different places, with the exception, presumably, of Native Americans who have been sort of involuntarily absorbed into the polity of the United States. And in that sense, the basic work that Durkheim thought was perhaps being dealt with in earlier times, more primitive periods of the prehistories of these European countries, forging social solidarity by, in a sense, communicating our shared values through punishment, right? We notice that Durkheim's cycle can work in two ways. Punishment can kind of communicate an existing form of shared social values, and it can also reinforce that. And that our very sense of diversity, right, e pluribus unum, from the many one, that very national project sense that we have to forge a unified country out of very diverse parts, may actually make us more in need of not only penal rituals, but we might say hotter, more emotional, more absolutist penal rituals and death, although it's not exactly the public execution on the scaffolds that we studied, still has some of that to it. What else? And what about bringing in our sort of Marxist toolkit here? What might we observe from a sort of Marxist point of view that would help to elucidate perhaps American exceptionalism on the death penalty? Right now, this half of the room is losing. You guys need to get some points on the board. It's 2-0 right now. Yes?
I'm not really big on economic stuff, but I think that the work ethic on the retentionist side, at least for China and the U.S., is different.
How does the work ethic play into it as you see it?
Well, I think it's a more demanding individualist requirement of society in general to like kind of do for yourself and earn your keep, which may translate to punishment.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing that I think could point to, and although interestingly, I want to highlight Japan there, and maybe South Korea. How many of you have studied South Korea or know South Korean contemporary society well? Maybe you can correct me on this, but or help us fit South Korea in here. But I think this would certainly be true for China and India, and to connect this to the United States. These are countries that, by and large, don't have much of a safety net for people. They have a great deal of inequality, and they're not particularly big on using government to kind of create some limits to that inequality, or at least some limits to the misery experienced by the people on the bottom side of the distribution from that inequality. Remember, going back to the stuff that folks like E.P. Thompson and his students were studying, which the topic they were studying in particular, which was the formation of sort of a private property capitalist economy in England during the Hanoverian period in the 18th century. We saw there that the death penalty formed a very important tool for sort of managing resistance to what might have expected to be a very unpopular, vulnerable, contested regime that was undermining, essentially tossing out a lot of traditional rights of the poor, imposing what at the time they had seemed a very alien system of private property where your ancestors had all kinds of rights on the Lord's domain. Suddenly they had no business being on it. They'd be trespassing if they came on to harvest second growth apples or other things they might have wanted a right to. So that kind of world where the death penalty is being used as a tool of control, class control, in a highly unequal and a society without not many carrots, right? It's a stick in a world without many carrots, if you want to use that metaphor, might connect the United States, even though by certainly the standards of China and India, we have a fairly decent safety net, although China, I think, is trying to catch up rapidly in that regard. But certainly compared to these countries, or I should say at least to Germany, the UK, France, and Canada, the United States would tend to be more individualistic, and in that sense, perhaps more dependent on the ultimate stick of the death penalty to kind of produce social order and control in the absence of support or popularity. Other points, or if we bring Foucault into this account as well. Just an addendum to your point, keep in mind that Marxists don't only look at economic inequality. They might think that these same kind of issues of hegemony apply to other kinds of inequality. And is there a way in which the United States may stand out there as a bit different from Europe?
Well, I think I don't know how this relates to abolitionist countries, but I think of like discrimination and inequality in the U.S. at the outset during the war and the Jim Crow period, where there was death penalty used like for ridiculous reasons. Obviously, was like a tool for power, and so maybe Marx would say that it was used as like a way for a certain class to exercise power over another class, just like fear tactics and manipulation.
So when we compare, the United States in the 18th and early 19th century to England, on one dimension it looks a lot more equal. So, if you're looking at white males in the colonies that become the United States and in England at that time, the white male in Virginia, North Carolina, New York, or Massachusetts is a much more equal citizen than the white male who doesn't own property in England, who can't vote, who can't serve as a justice of the peace, who basically is excluded from most forms of control in English society. But if we bring race in, right, then suddenly the United States looks much more unequal, right, because England doesn't have at least a legal regime of slavery by the end of the 18th century, and that in the form of Jim Crow carries on well into the 20th century, right? So, and again, we might say that although it's not class, at least narrowly construed, this racial inequality produces a powerful utility of the death penalty, which is essentially through a combination again of presumably of terror and mercy, in a sense, to try to keep the black, in this case, minority or African American minority, or perhaps other disadvantaged minorities in check in a society that remains very unequal in terms of race. So, and that is indeed one of the things that students of punishment society trying to explain this difference between Europe and the United States are most likely to point to, both class inequality, the absence of a welfare safety net, and racial inequality. What other arguments, what other points might be made about these differences, or explaining this American peculiarism? What might Foucault's, or any of the three?
I think the one thing that could be considered different as far as the United States, on our point about our individualism or individual tendencies, is that I think in a lot of ways we do have a lot of individual power, perhaps compared to other countries, not as much as far as like individual lobbying power, individual power, individual state, and that would make like the party of the victims, which usually are a pretty gnarly lobby in the face of capital punishment. Victims lobby a lot more power.
Well, I think pointing to victims is a very interesting point, and we'll talk about it more on Thursday. And I think it can relate to Foucault. After all, if we think of the Foucault story as we meet it in his Discipline and Punish, the segment that we read, we might think that the United States should not be the country that retains the death penalty. After all, if the death penalty is a vestige of monarchical rule, of all of these countries, we're the one that kind of got rid of the king quickest and earliest. And Japan has an emperor. China had monarchical elements. Well, in the 19th century, India, etc., was in a colonial state that was very monarchical in terms of England's role there. So we might expect the United States, from that point of view, to not see much utility in the death penalty. It doesn't need these rituals to recharge the super status of the king. But when we think about victims, something else comes in, which is that almost the opposite side of the coin there. In America, the individual is king to some extent, and there is a kind of concern with victims in which the criminal justice system is often seen not as a tool of elite power, but as a form of popular self-defense and expression of local and popular desire to both protect the community and to enforce the law against unpopular outsiders, right? So there's a kind of sense that you get in the United States, arguably culturally, where we always had elected public prosecutors, elected judges, etc., that we view our criminal justice system as more of a system of expressing our private or to some extent communal values and sentiments, and less a top-down control system. And from that point of view, the death penalty may factor as an important ritual of political power in the way that Foucault would expect, not as an elaborate ritual to establish the ferocity and majesty of the king, but a different kind of ritual, one aimed at establishing the importance of sacredness of life of victims, including ordinary victims, or maybe especially ordinary victims, young people, older people, etc., who are more vulnerable. There's and a ritual that might be more focused, less focused on the actual delivery of the execution, and more on the ritual, the sort of symbolic rituals of the death penalty, sentencing someone to death, a jury, handing down a sentence, and indeed, I think we'll see that there are some important resonances from that when we talk about this a bit more on Thursday. But now I want to do a little bit of something we don't normally do in social science, which is a sort of thought experiment. And so I have to step out of social science and into a kind of a popular fiction modality. This is my daughter's favorite TV character right now, Doctor Who, as you may know, is able to travel through time in it's actually a blue police call station of the sort that used to dot England in the early part of the 20th century. But in any event, Doctor Who travels through time, usually trying not to interfere directly with history, but nonetheless brushing up against it on a regular basis. And of course, technologies like that, especially imaginary ones, open up the fascinating question: what if history could change? What if we could go back and change little things in history? Could it make a difference? And in the case of America's abolitionism or retentionism, there's a very interesting sort of possibility to explore there, which is the Furman versus Georgia case and its subsequent decision in Gregg versus Georgia, which I asked you to read for today, and how that would have or could have played out differently if only a couple of votes had been different. All right, so consider this alternative present to the one that we're now in. All it would have done is required moving 2 votes out of the 9 Supreme Court justices that voted on Furman versus Georgia. If 2 justices, and I have my nominations, and if we're going to actually get on Dr. Who's box and go back there, we're going to have to go talk to 2 different people. One of them is justice, because there were essentially 3 votes in Furman versus Georgia, Justices Douglas, Marshall, and Brennan. I'll go over this in a moment, who were clearly ready to declare capital punishment unconstitutional, period. No chance to revise it. It's dead. It's over. But they needed 5 votes to make that good law. There were 3 other justices that said, I should say there were 2 or 3 other justices, 2 important ones I want to focus on, who said, we don't think that the death penalty is inherently unconstitutional, but we do think that the ones that the United States currently has that were at issue in Furman are problematic, and that was especially Justices Stewart and White. And then there was a dissenter, Justice Blackmun, who dissented in Furman and joined the majority then in Gregg, who we could also go talk to because, as we'll see on Thursday, before he retired from the Supreme Court in the last decade, at the beginning of the last decade, he announced that he was now regretted that he had participated in trying to regularize capital punishment in the Gregg model, and that he would pretty much write it off as unconstitutional. So there if you could get Stewart and if you could get Blackmun, joined with Justices Douglas, Marshall, and Brennan, you have 5 votes to declare the death penalty unconstitutional, either federal or state, under the 8th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. And notice what happens if 2 votes change. Suddenly, there isn't this anomaly. And not only isn't there not an anomaly, the U.S. is near the lead in this transformation. So we're not Germany, right? Germany switches in 49 after the end of the Nazi period.